Great morning, friends. Great morning, friends. Great morning, world. Just getting us live streaming to too many platforms. Let's get connected. All right, we'll have to do that in a second. So, great morning, everybody. Great morning, world. This is your friendly neighborhood dragon, and welcome to another synopsis and edition of the Makes Sense with Dr. JC podcast. What we do on Mondays is we take our podcasts. I just recorded a podcast on this topic of mastering flow. And what I like to do on Mondays is just create a live interactive version that just highlights some of the things that I think will arm and equip you for a better day today. Right? We're going to make sense of flow, and we're going to talk about the missing link to unlocking peak performance. Great morning, Susan. Great morning, Lori. So much fun for me, and this lends perfectly into the flow state. You know, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but there's certain times of the day, and there's certain ways that we move into action that aid and abet this idea of getting into the flow state. And for me, one of them that I've definitely identified is when I have no guidance from a script. And I don't know if anybody can resonate with that, but you know, maybe today, one of the early messages that we can entertain for the day is just to not be scripted today, right? We had a baby this morning. Oh, cool. Little baby. It looks like a baby horse. Congratulations, Lori. Yeah. So for me, the flow state happens, and I've learned this the hard way. For me, when I'm speaking and I'm scripted in any way, shape, or form, I mean, I have my notes here because I did a whole podcast episode on this, and I might reference them just so I remember things. But when I'm scripted in life, meaning speaking from something that was already thought out, I just find that I don't perform. The goods don't get delivered. So for me, I love this idea of just coming here free flowing with some ideas and some inspiration to share with you, arm and equip you with things like awareness of them so that you will notice these things today and maybe learn how to leverage and hack into these peak performance states. So just welcome. For those of you that have never met me, and you're watching this live, this is interactive, so you can ask me questions here. We'll be together for 20, 30 minutes, closer to the 30. And it's just my intention here and all of the work that I do, the book that's coming out, my Make Sense podcast, is just to give you a daily dose, and my Substack as well, give you a daily dose of a fresh new perspective on some things that you already have an opinion on and a perspective on. But what we know is that the goal, if we want to grow, is that we have to change the way we look at things. Because if you want the things that you're looking at to change and you're not in a growth mode, well, it starts with changing the way you look at things. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So I like to look at my work, my book, my Substack, my lives that I do here, my podcast, as a vehicle and a tool for you to change the way you look at things, right? So I like to give you a different perspective. I like to point things out to people and give them the opportunity to check that out. So that's what you get. So I hope that you'll support the podcast. That's Make Sense with Dr. JC. Then also the Substack, the Make Sense Substack. And we have this series running called Echoes of right? Because we love to just question and dispute things. All of those things will be linked in the descriptions to this. So this video will live on YouTube, and I'd love to interact with anybody that's coming in live. And you can just check in, let us know where you're coming from, and also ask questions or make statements or say something mean, because I'm open to growth. One thing I can tell you is that I haven't made up my mind about anything yet. So if I ever say something that doesn't resonate with you, let me know, because I'd love to learn your perspective. If I can find out today that something that I think is right is actually wrong, and I can check the facts to prove so, that's a big win for me. So Everybody's welcome. Everybody's welcome. So I'm going to get right into this. I call this episode, and like I said, we already recorded it, and it'll probably drop by the end of the week or next week. And we actually have a great guest coming in today. We've got one of the world's leading experts on the carnivore diet, which is just fascinating for me because it's a new, fresh perspective on health and longevity. This is a gentleman that actually will look you right in the face and tell you that plants, right, and vegetables are poison, right? And he'll back it up with science. So I've got that interview coming up later today, and I'm excited about it. But right now, we're focusing on flow, on the flow state. So a lot of work that I do is in the realm of changing perspective, right? I've created a 4-step interface response system. I'll refer to that throughout this, but my whole thing is this idea of changing the way you look at things so that the things you look at change. But in order to do that and step into this flow state, which we're about to talk about, there's some steps that people are unaware of. And one thing that we recognize here is that who you are determines how well what you do works. So when you're out there in do land trying to get better results, or even in this case, trying to get in that flow state, that effortless flow state where everything's going right and just nothing seems to be in your way and you're just unstoppable and you're in the creative process and it's just effortless. If we want to get into one of those things, or into that state, we have to remember that there's a version of you that doesn't do well at transferring into those states. And then there's a version of you that would have much, much more opportunity to step into those states. So that's my thing. I love to just remind people that we're walking around with our conditioned mind, right? So, and what I mean by that is that our mother, father, teacher, preacher, what we consume all do land. That's right. What we consume all day in society, which we're doing unconsciously. We've been having a lot of deep talks with my daughter about that and setting some rules in the house. I said, we're referring to that aspect of the conditioned mind that's being conditioned with consistency every day because of what we consume. So I teach my daughter and my boys, because they're living in a synthesized land, I don't even know what their baseline for reality is anymore. This is a fascinating idea with our kids. And this is what gets in our way. This is what, the authors of these 2 amazing books, would call flow blockers, right? Things that block us from getting into flow. And that is, all of this distraction and all of this stuff that unconsciously is being laid down as the foundation for your baseline reality. So think about this. I wrote something on this today. I was asking my daughter, what her baseline of reality is and what her idea of how the world works and all of that stuff. And I was hearing little glimpses from my daughter of some things that are just not true, right? And I realized that our kids, I mean, us as well, but even more so our kids and their kids coming up are consuming so much stuff through TV, through news, and very toxic stuff, but then also just glued to their technology. And I get it. I probably would have been too. Great morning, Kathy. But it's getting to the point where they are losing touch with what's actually real. So I just wanted to offer you that today. I mean, if you're of my generation, you're in one sense lucky because you grew up, with dirt under your nails and wiggling your toes in dirt and grass and things like that. I remember all these concerts that I went to and I was just barefoot, lost my shoes, right? So the world is very, very different. So I just want to remind people that when we're unconsciously consuming stuff out there, there's another thing at play, and that is that you're doing it with so much frequency that the day that things go awry, you'll have to go back and reference like get back to reality, but your reality will be a synthesized one. So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but very, very interesting frontier we have in front of us. So long story short, I'm forcing my kids. It's crazy that I have to force them to spend 2 hours reading and writing a day. And it's interesting to hear kids say that, because they're like, what are you, out of your mind? 2 hours reading and writing? And I'm like, do you have any idea how much time you spend scrolling on Instagram? Because we can look into it. And then they realize in that moment, this is that awakening moment, that then they realize in that moment, they say, holy crap, right? That 2 hours of reading and writing is like minuscule compared to how many hours I'm logging. And then there's the computer and the games and stuff. So in any case, I want to get into this topic right here, but fascinating to see what's transpiring and how much harder it is going to be to get into flow. So just as a reminder, this concept of the flow state, and you can see right here, this first book here, this blue one, called Flow, that was written by kind of the creator, the founder of the flow state, and that is Mihaly, Csikszentmihalyi. I think that's the closest way I can say his name. And what he did is he just identified that there was this state that human beings could achieve, whether it was through extreme sports or anything, or even like in my case, writing, where people would report and they would use this concept of flow. Like people would say, I was just, things were just flowing. And it was this place that all humans have access to, which is important in this discussion. This place where they would just get better results, and there was just nothing holding them back, and their confidence was high, their resistance was low, and everything just went perfectly, and they would report having a great day. So he was fascinated by that, and he came up with a lot of really, really great insights. But then you have this guy, Stephen Kotler, who came around, who took it to the next level. And that's the other book here, Finding or The Rise of Superman. And there's tons of stuff on YouTube and everything like that. And if you listen to my podcast episode on this, I go deep into all of that stuff. But these two guys took this concept and brought it into the reality of human beings, and showed us that there were actual factors taking place in our life that we have choice over, that would depict whether or not we would go into the flow state. So Stephen Kotler started talking about this idea of hacking into flow. And it's interesting, in our group the other day, and I'll give a shout out to one of our Make Sense Academy members, Colleen. She asked a question where she said something like, well, why would somebody want to hack into flow? It's an interesting question, but in that question, you could also see that maybe there was a misunderstanding of what flow was. So the reason why you'd want to learn how to hack into this flow state is because it would take your superpowers and put them at a heightened state where whatever it is that you're trying to get accomplished today, right, with your goals and your dreams, and that oscillating pattern of typically starting off strong and then not following through, getting distracted, which is a lot of the work that I do with the interface response system. If you're in the flow state, you accelerate, right? Struggle comes up and adversity comes up, and it means nothing to you. So they do a great job in the book of giving us examples of a surfer and or some sort of an extreme sports person. But I can tell you that there's a difference between being a writer and being a writer that's in flow, right? So a lot of writers talk about having some sort of a writer's block. So you could use that analogy of having a writer's block with anything in your life. If you guys set out to do something today, and I would assume that you if I asked you, like, what are you looking to accomplish today? You would say something in the realm of this. And if you start to like awaken and start to notice that you have a tendency of setting goals and not getting goals, that's kind of like that analogy of that writer's block. Something gets in the way. So the reason why you'd want to hack into flow or learn how to spend more time in flow is because in the flow state, none of those things exist. And the best of you, the best version of you comes out, which means you get a better production of whatever it is you're looking to have. You're having a better time if you're into that sort of thing. You're impervious, or as I like to say, unfuckwithable when it comes to distraction and things that don't matter, right? You just move effortlessly through the poop that seems to be sitting in between you and everything that you want when you're in the flow state. So that's why you'd want to learn how to hack into flow rather than just wonder why every now and then you have a really good day, right? That's why we want to learn how to do this. So I want to give you a couple of things in the next 15 minutes that I picked up. And like I said, subscribe to the Make Sense with Dr. JC Doornick podcast, and you'll get the ultimate 30 minutes of all of this stuff. If you listen to that episode, you will be armed and equipped. Right now, I just want to have a conversation with you about some things that I think are really, really relevant. So first of all, in the book that Csikszentmihalyi wrote, he was saying that he identified that flow arises from 3 elements that come into alignment. So here's something that you can kind of write down, and you can say, okay, so here I am entertaining this idea of increasing the odds of getting into flow. And here are 3 elements when in alignment that have a tendency of producing it. So here's one that you always know. He says it's important you have to have a clear goal that provides direction. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So you have to have a clear goal. So it's important to stop right now and identify that some of the things that you know that you already need to do are part of this. So this is not just some sort of a sneaky way of manipulating the universe and getting better results. You still have to do work. So you have to have a clear goal. And the activity that you do, and I'll use the analogy of surfing, has to provide immediate feedback. So it's interesting to look at feedback and differentiate it from this idea of return on investment. So when you get into an activity today, there has to be some things going on and some things that you're sensing and feeling that indicate that you're in that activity, right? So it's not necessarily attached to getting the product at the end of the activity. So a surfer, when he commits to a wave, right, his goal is clear. He wants to surf that wave. And as soon as that wave comes, all of those things that he's feeling, he's going in, and every single part of his body is engaged fully in that. So there's immediate feedback, right? And then the last one refers to this, and this is what is really interesting and relevant to my work. The last one is there has to be a balance of the challenge, right? There's a challenge and balance, or a challenge and skill balance. So what that means is that you have to be challenged enough that at least your skill sets, in the case of surfing, are in play. So like if I'm writing about something inspiring, then it's going to be a challenge. Writing about something controversial, it's going to be a challenge. If I'm writing something that's boring, I'm less apt to be into the to the flow state. So those are the basic 3 elements that need to be in alignment. But as I said, in modern times, Stephen Kotler, who became fascinated with, the rise of Superman, right? The idea of hacking into flow, that was all his idea. So I want to share with you that there's some things that he identified that were X factors in those basic elements. So Stephen Kotler identified that the flow cycle exists. There's an actual cycle. So I don't have the ability to show you the graphics right now, but in essence, there's 4 aspects to the flow cycle. And it's important to know this because then you could phase place where you are in your life right now. So the 4 aspects of the flow cycle is it begins with some form of struggle or adversity, right? There's always a challenge in the beginning. And then how you interpret and navigate that challenge, or the poop that sits in between you and what you want. Your clear goal is set, but now you have this wave that you have to surf, and that's a challenge, right? So there's always struggle in the beginning of the flow state. Now, how you interpret that struggle is very important, and that's what the interface response system does for you. But when you address struggle in a proactive way and you say, hey, struggle is part of the process. Ryan Holiday said the obstacle is the way, right? I'm a stoic, and all of that stuff, and you push through it, then you will have what's called a positive release. That's the second phase of the flow cycle. So it goes struggle and then release, right? And then after you release from the struggle in a positive way, meaning you push through, you're patient, you don't look at struggle as an obstacle that is holding you back. You look at it as an opportunity to go forward, like a kid playing a video game and the monsters at the end of it. And then you enter the flow state. And then the flow state is awesome. Everything is great. You're tubed in the wave. And then the fourth stage of the flow cycle is where you decompress, where you process what just happened and you debrief it, right? There has to be something after it. There has to be some downtime where you approach things and say, what just happened? What do I think about it? Celebrate it, and things like that. So those are the four cycles. And what's interesting is right after the debrief, what comes next is struggle. So the first thing that you'll notice when you kind of get into the idea of saying, I want to be in flow, is it's common for people to have a different relationship formed with struggle, right? So the whole concept of struggle and what you think about it and the way you look at struggle is everything, right? So for those of you out there that are learning how to become comfortable living uncomfortable, right? Like pushing into discomfort. This is the whole idea of an extreme athlete. Extreme athletes don't do anything comfortable. They always look for the bigger wave, the bigger jump, the more daring skydive, right? As a writer, I find myself becoming increasingly uncomfortable by letting more people read it, by taking challenging topics that I have to do research on and stuff, right? So there's always a challenge at the beginning, and how you look at challenge is everything. Because if you look at challenge as challenging and something that is potentially holding you back, then you'll do what most people do, is they oscillate between step 1 and step 2 of the flow cycle, right? They experience the struggle and they react by either running from it or falling victim of it, or trying to get around it and things like that without embracing it. And then they oscillate. They never positively release from struggle, which is the step before going into flow. So that's an important thing. That's a fun thing to arm yourself with today, is what's my relationship with struggle, right? And you can say the right thing right now, but I would encourage you to ask that question of yourself when struggle arises, right? It's your knee-jerk reflex to say, oh, struggle, this sucks. You're never excited about struggle, but if you take some time and you process it the right way, you might remind yourself, oh, that's right. This is the ingredient in the recipe that I'm trying to create and get into flow. So this is where my fascination is. And this is where I think these guys could have done a better job, but I think that's my place. So I like to say that, Mihaly, he was the innovator. He was the first founder of flow. Stephen Kotler took it to the next level and took it into the modern age and started talking about hacking into flow. But the totality of what they're teaching us is not acknowledging what the interface response system acknowledges. And that is that it's who you are at any given time that determines how well you do something. So if we see that how we navigate through struggle is the biggest challenge, it's one thing for me to say, well, yeah, you have to push through struggle and you'll get the positive result. Who doesn't know that? Who doesn't know that on paper, struggle is a good thing? But that's different when you're the kind of person that is feeling like a victim. Maybe you've had a sequence of events. There's all sorts of factors that will make it very difficult for you to look at struggle, specifically your struggle, which is very unique, right? Your struggle is different than anybody else's because they might be the same category of struggle, but the way you're perceiving it, oh man, you could easily look at struggle and say, hey, my struggle is harder than yours. So the interface response system gives you that added weapon of awareness that is crucial. And when my book comes out, it's going to be in the category of these two books because it is a flow hacking tool, right? They talk about in their book, they talk about a lot of triggers that can prompt and increase the odds of us, navigating a struggle the right way. But they're not talking about step one of the interface response system, which is called perceive, where we acknowledge this idea of who you are determines how well what you do works. And we acknowledge the conditioned nature of our mind. So what does that mean? Just because you wake up today and say, today's the day I'm going to go out and kick some ass. So that's setting that clear goal, right? That's really, really important. And hopefully you get that immediate response from it. But as soon as struggle comes up, even if you know that struggle is part of it, if you look at that struggle the wrong way, you're always going to struggle with it. So the interface response system acknowledges why that happens. It acknowledges that just because you made a decision to grow, you're still operating with the same operating system that your mother, father, teacher, preacher, your life experience created. A decision to grow does not alleviate you from your operating system. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I teach people is that when I approach struggle, my thoughts and feelings about it are always negative, right? I always fall prey to feeling like it's something happening to me. But I take that first step and acknowledge why I'm like that. And I make sense of the conditioned mind. And I say, oh, I'm just going to observe that my mind and my stress response system is reacting to struggle like it always has. But you know what? I'm going to put that on pause. So second step of interface response system is that we pause and we create space to look at the situation differently. We step into a space where we can entertain a different perspective, like it's a good thing, right? So we take our thoughts and our feelings, and rather than let them run the show, we put them on pause. So we teach people in that phase to say, and that means, okay, I see you, I hear you, but I'm going to just put you over here right now, and I'm going to allow myself to entertain different perspectives and look at struggle differently. So that's one of the things that excites me the most about my interface response system, is that it's a flow hacking tool. And I talk about that in depth in the podcast. So, there's so many just different things in this episode. Stephen Kotler says that flow follows focus, right? When we're super, super focused, deep, uninterrupted attention. So what that indicates is that if you can do things to put yourself into a higher state of focus and performance, like, this is the reason why I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's not that I like getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, but my brain is most awake at 4 o'clock in the morning. And also the amount of flow blockage is at its all-time minimal at 4 in the morning. So that's where I have determined that I can be more focused in the morning. What is it for you? Because it's very, very easy to commit to an hour time slot during the day, but be interrupted. The state is neurochemical. So the flow state is not just like some sort of mindset, right? It's understanding that your biology helps you work with it, right? Not against it. So eating right and exercise and things like that are very, very much correlated with the flow state. And probably one of the biggest ones, and I don't want to go over time today, but it's this concept back to struggle. One of the things that Kotler has identified, and this is super true, is that it has to be whatever it is that you're doing today, this uncomfortable thing that you're doing, the hard work. Sometimes we have this tendency of thinking that what we're doing is difficult, but it's just something that we're used to doing. Like you might have a difficult job or you might have a difficult life day to day, but chances are you've absorbed that into your comfort zone. So what they're saying is the task that you are going to elicit each day has to push a little bit. They actually say 4% more challenging than usual, because what they identify is that our skill sets are programmed for a certain level of challenge. And if you exceed that level of challenge, make it a little bit more difficult, push into a more uncomfortable situation. It could be me putting a little bit too much on my plate, which normally would trigger overwhelm and make me run. But putting a little bit more on my plate to make it a little bit more challenging, why would I do that? That is a trigger that in puts you in this state of flow. So if you're the kind of person that's been kind of coasting and you feel like you're moving through life in a rocking chair, but you feel like you're putting the work in, I would encourage you to level it up a little bit. Make it a little bit more difficult. Make it a little bit more difficult, because what happens in that state when you're challenged, maybe the wave is a little bit too big, proverbial for your life. When the wave is a little bit too big in your life, how do you respond? When you're in a situation where you have to perform, like me pushing out onto a stage in front of a lot of people, and I struggle with public speaking and I have anxiety. If I push myself out onto that stage, I go into high alert, and a version of me, remember who you are determines how well what you do works. A version of me, Superman, comes out because I have no choice, right? Now, the reason why you wouldn't do that is because you're afraid that you would run. Try it sometime. That's not what people do when they push themselves into a more difficult situation. They react and they respond. They rise to the occasion. That's why he calls it the rise of Superman. Mastery comes from respecting the cycle. So you should know the cycle. Flow is available to anyone. Very, very important to understand this. A lot of people have this idea that they're not cut out for success. And the reason why you do is you have this comparative reality. You see what successful people look like. They're shredded, they're excited, they're running around, they're doing things that you're petrified of. But what you don't know is they're no different than you. They're just handling life differently than you. They're looking at life differently than you and handling it differently than you, but they're exactly like you. So you can learn how to look at life differently and handle things differently, but it takes practice. So when you see somebody that stresses you out because you hate them because you ain't them type thing, just realize that they had to go through the passage of pain from where you're at right now to get that way, and you can do that too. So take baby steps. Take baby steps with your hacking of flow, and just look to level up in different ways. It's like a muscle. You'll build it. And it's very much connected with discipline and things like that. The challenge with flow, though, is it's very much like a drug that never gets you there. Like cocaine. One of the dangers of those types of drugs is that you get this high that feels great, but it goes away and you start chasing that high. And then people start to do things that make them get higher. So once you become addicted to this feeling of flow, right? Remember, each time you press into the discomfort that instigates and elicits flow, it becomes part of your comfort zone. That's what's interesting, is the things that you're afraid of right now in your life, folks, will one day be very, very normal and comfortable to you. That's the problem with growth, is that you can never stop seeking growth, right? And the day that you think that you can just become comfortable with some things that you used to be scared of, that's just like staying under your covers. So one of the challenges with this, which I accept because I'm such a flow junkie, is you always have to look for that 4% each day. So what does that mean? I would just, encourage you to just get a little bit more uncomfortable. Pick up the phone when you're afraid to. Um, Speak your mind. Let your creativity flow when you're afraid of what people think. Just step into those uncomfortable zones, and what you'll see is there's always a payoff. There's always a payoff. And one day somebody will look at you and say, I could never be like that person, right? Hey, there's Brian Swift. He says, I like your deeper dive into the flow state. Yeah, well, that's what's fun about being unscripted and just letting it flow. So for me, like I said, when I speak just in real time and walk out on a stage and have a topic, but no idea what I'm going to say, I find that uncomfortable situation, that fear that I have that I might fail, is what puts me in the flow state. So what puts you in the flow state, everybody? If you're watching this, we're going to say goodbye now. And I encourage you to listen to the episode on this that'll come out on the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. Got some great interviews coming up. But what is it that you could do today that's 4% more challenging and would give you the ability and arm you with that ability to step into flow? And if you find yourself running from those things, well, then you need to learn the interface response system. Just come check out the Make Sense Academy, where we're actually putting that work in. We're learning those 4 steps, arming ourselves with the awareness of the conditioned mind, rather than just thinking that we're going to have a good day because we decided to have a good day. It's not the way it works. It's part of it. You got to decide to, but you're running a system that is outdated and no longer applies. And we have to upgrade your system. So that's what the interface response system is for. And it will very, very much dramatically change what these guys are trying to explain to you. So you guys have a wonderful day. I'm going to go have a date with my wife, because we date in the morning because it's too crazy in our lives to date at night. So I love and appreciate you. Remember, if you learned something today, give it away, pay this forward, share it. That's how it's going to stay. Come check out the podcast. Have a great day. Bye-bye.